Hello everyone, these are 28mm gripping beast figures. They're all Varangian Guard of one kind or another, and it has taken me ages and ages to get these finished. I really struggled with them, though I'm pleased with the way they've turned out in general at the end, but boy was it a struggle to get these done. I originally, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, I purchased pre-painted a Byzantine faction for the game of Saga. I don't often buy pre-painted figures, but at that time I was really keen to acquire a number of factions to use to play Saga, and I paint very slowly, so I did shop around for a few factions that were pre-painted on the internet, and amongst others I got this really nicely painted Byzantine army. I'm always in two minds about pre-painted figures because I can never really compliment them in terms of adding to their numbers because I can't match the painting style. Occasionally I'm a bit disappointed with the paint job that's been done on them, and occasionally I'm so kind of impressed with the paint job that I don't really want to even kind of play with them. I don't want to sort of handle them too much. And these Byzantines were really nice. I'm not going to show them to you today because it's another topic in itself, but really beautifully painted. All the bows were strung, all that kind of thing. And I quite got into playing the Byzantine faction and decided I would add to this faction by painting up some Varangian Guard. Hence these figures that you see in front of you. Now, the Varangian Guard in the Saga set of rules are a little bit sort of strange in that if you use the character Harald Hardrada as a hero of the Viking Age with the original Viking faction, then you're allowed to swap a number of Hearthguard in the Viking faction that you have for Varangian Guard. Originally you could swap 12 figures, but the rules were changed so you could only have 8. The other way that you can have Varangian Guard in Saga is if you're playing the Byzantine faction, which is what I had in mind. You can add another Harald Hardrada character. He's a younger version of the same character as a captain of the Varangian Guard, and then you're allowed to replace Hearthguard again with Varangian Guard, and in that case you're allowed to have no more Varangian Guard than other troop types in your faction. So effectively, if you're playing a 6-point faction, you're probably going to be limited to a maximum of 12 Hearthguard. Right, so that was my initial problem, was that Gripping Beast at that time didn't produce some of these figures that you see in front of you now. But they did have some figures that I'll show you them there. Let's just try and zoom in on them a little bit. Those guys at the back there with double-handed axes, and those guys there were really their Varangian Guard. In about 2016, they brought out these guys here. Where have they gone? Those guys kind of in the back distance there. And they came out at the same time as this figure here, which is a young version of Harold Hardrada. So really, the figures that you saw at the beginning, that were at the back there, they were produced by Gripping Beast long before the game of Saga came out, as were a lot of these figures that are in blue cloaks. Those guys there are Varangian Palace Guard, and these guys here, the chaps at the front with the bannerman and so on, are Varangian Guard Command. So it's a little bit confusing. I'm not a great expert in which companies use which sculptors and so on, but it's very clear, even to a kind of numpty like me, that those two sets of figures have been produced by different sculptors. They're completely different style. And the ones that have been brought out more recently clearly are intended to be played with the Byzantine faction using the younger Harold Hardrada. They came out more or less the same time. But one of the things that happened is that I kind of got lost in the rules and regulations, as it were. I began to kind of lose steam, really, in my enthusiasm for painting them. That's partly because the paint jobs weren't coming out as I hoped. I was becoming kind of very aware that blue colour in particular just doesn't look realistic to me at all. And somehow the figures themselves, the differences in the sculpts, kind of made me paint them in a different way. It's hard to explain, but I was kind of trying to copy the colour photographs on Gripping Beast's website, trying to reproduce some of the colour schemes that they had, but at the same time was finding that they didn't kind of marry together. So they're not a kind of coherent, visually, they don't look like a uniform unit. Not that I would be able to play all these anyway in one go on the tabletop if I was playing Saga. So I really began to kind of lose a bit of my mojo for it, and I was painting them so slowly anyway that about October last year I just put them to one side. I got really enthused about Congo and kind of put these to one side and thought, yeah, I'll get back to them. And it's taken me quite a while to get round to finishing them off. I'm glad I have done, but yeah, all kinds of difficulties with painting them, how to paint them, the colours to use, the styles, the mismatch, the fact that it's not easy, even if you get the rules into your head about how, with the Byzantine faction. If you play Harold Hardrada, when you put the Varangians into the faction, you're allowed to use two battle boards at once. You're allowed to use the Viking battle board and the Byzantine battle board together. It's very difficult to do. I tried one game doing it, really found it hard to work out the strategy and so on. You'd have to really play a lot of Saga in order to get good at it, and it's not a particularly easy faction to play. A kind of combined battle board of Vikings and Byzantines. So everything was kind of like dampening my enthusiasm to do it. And then I also had a lot of technical difficulties. If anyone who's familiar with this figure will have spotted immediately that he's got a shield in his left hand, and that's not how the figure comes. Basically, you purchase the figure, and you have to glue both his arms to this sort of sleeved part of his arm. The lower arm comes separate, and it's a very kind of slender model, very slender indeed. And I found I was using super glue, and I just hardly put any pressure on at all to glue the left arm into that socket in the sleeve, and the axe that he's carrying in his left arm just snapped off, and it was so slender I just couldn't find any way of pinning it, drilling some holes and pinning it back in place. So I tried then to drill out the hand and replace the original axe with a slightly stouter axe that I had in my bits box. That didn't work either, so in the end I just covered up the mess I'd made by gluing a shield to his left side, and I've hidden my mistakes, but that was getting to me as well. I had an awful lot of trouble with the decals on the shields, which were all gripping beasts, but the shields that come with these guys here, which are the newer range, are all separate. The shields that come with the older figures are all attached to the body. So that one there, so it's attached to the figure. That one doesn't look too bad, but the ones in the older range, I found the shields were very kind of rough at the edges, and it's virtually impossible to get a neat kind of attachment. You always have to kind of paint around the borders. This is a case in point. You always have to paint around the borders anyway, and I thought it looked a little bit scrappy. That's a good example there of the kind of rough edges to the shield. So I wasn't happy with the way the decals went on in general. One of the figures has got an oval shield, so you have to get hold of the oval Byzantine transfers from Little Big Man Studios to put that on. I think I might have said Gripping Beast decals before. I meant the Little Big Man Studios. They do decals to fit the Gripping Beast. But the shields that are detached from the figures are definitely a different size. You have the same issues where you have to paint around the edges. I've tried to add a little bit of splash of colour on some of the edges as well, tart them up a little bit. Yeah, and it all in all, and finally as well, this guy here with the banner. So you can see this banner a bit better. Really splendid banner, but that was so hard as well to do. Gerson has just put up a video on how to apply and how to use the Little Big Man Studio transfers, and it's a really good tutorial. I recommend you watch it. The trap that most people fall into is they don't realise that there's a kind of clear layer that it's really difficult to get off, but you have to detach that, and then you reveal the image, which is in reverse, and you have to it's got a sticky surface, and you have to press that down onto the material that you're going to use for the banner. You can either use paper. I use a sort of foil. Because it's a clear transfer, the paper has to be white, or the foil has to be painted white in order for the white to show through. And on top of all that, in this case, not only did the banner not have the intervening part of material that wraps around the staff, but one side of the banner was on a different part of the sheet to the other side. So it was virtually impossible, because you're looking at it from the back and you're moistening the back and then peeling that off. It was practically impossible to line the two sides up. So I had all kinds of difficulty doing that, and then I had to kind of, because they were on two separate pieces of foil material, I had to use mini-putt in the kind of across that area there in order to represent the continuation of the banner as it wrapped around the staff, and it was a complete nightmare. I mean, it's not a bad result in the end. It's a lovely banner. You can never in a million years paint anything like that, but a real headache. Everything seemed to be frustrating me. However, one thing that I was really pleased with was that, as I say, I was trying to copy various ways of painting them, and I went as well as looking at the website and how they've been painted on the Gripping Beast website. I also had a number of Osprey books, so I just wanted to show you what I had in mind when I was painting them. Now, it's a little bit kind of coincidental, but the original Osprey book, which is much older, is this one here, which is Byzantine armies 886 to 118. So it doesn't just include Varangian Guard, but notice this guy here. He is a Varangian guardsman, and he is virtually identical in pose and everything to that guy there. So there's clearly a kind of liaison between what was going on in the sculptor's mind and what he'd seen in Osprey and so on. There's a clear duplication of that pose and the hair, the beard, everything. But I haven't painted it at all like in the book. I painted it as I saw on the Gripping Beast website. But since then, Osprey brought out a couple more books on the Varangian Guard specifically. There's one called the Varangian Guard 988 to 1453, and then there's this other one here called Byzantine Imperial Guardsmen. Now in here, the painting is far more, not the painting, but the way the dress is portrayed is far more ornate, lots more silks, and they're generally all kind of bedazzled and blinged up. That's a good example there. So it became, not only did I have figures that were, let's try and show you some out of this one. Things like that. Yeah, so not only did I have figures that didn't kind of marry together, but the way the sculptors had kind of designed their figures did really reflect the two kind of different Osprey publications, because these figures here have got far more in the way of sashes and capes and silks and all kinds of stuff. So I wanted to paint those up so that they looked a lot more decorative, as it were. And I tried to kind of copy that across. I'm going to show you all these figures in a bit more detail in a moment. But I did try and cross that over. So underneath that guy's blue cloak there, the one I showed you originally, you can see I have tried to give, I have tried to give him a little bit of a kind of ornate undergarment there. But it was just impossible to kind of to do. So it all ended up a little bit disparate, disconnected. Oh yeah, I'll show you in a moment, but I did have another issue as well. I'll probably mention that when I go through each group in general. So what I'm going to do next, having stopped kind of making my excuses for the strange appearance of all these figures, is I want to show you each group in turn, give you a little bit more detail on them. But one of the things that I did attempt was to kind of give them a sort of satin look. So I just want to show you a range of paints. I'm going to cut away from them and show you a range of paints that I've been using that I think are very useful for that. So I just want to have it. This is going to be a brief aside where I talk about some of the paints that I've been using. Okay, so this is a company called Watercolours, who I discovered from watching a YouTube channel called Mickey's Minis. He's a professional painter. I think he's got some kind of link to this company because he uses their paints a lot. But the company itself are based in Cyprus, but you can order all their paints online and they come fairly rapidly. But a couple of things that I find interesting about them. One is that I predominantly use Foundry Paints, which are triads. Watercolours paints, you can buy them in groups of 5. Some of the colours I think are really interesting, some not so much. So the one at the front here is a turquoise colour, which I used on this chap here. Let me just zoom in on him a minute. So I use that turquoise colour for this chap's cloak. And because there are 5 shades rather than 3, you can get an awful lot more. I mean, I'm not a terribly good painter, so I haven't done it particularly well, but it gives you a lot more range in the colour. So you can bring out a lot more depth in something. You could just use them as a triad and have use the 3 at the top end of the range or the 3 at the bottom, overlapping number 3 in the middle. There's plenty of things. It's a very kind of versatile set of paints to use in that way. Unfortunately, not all the colours are really to my liking. That turquoise I particularly like, but there's another one here that I purchased, which is an olive colour, which I find is a really strange colour to use because it is so. The difference between colour number 5 and colour number 1 is just extreme, really. And you try to use those 5 on one surface, and it just looks weird, absolutely weird. They don't kind of melt together very well. But they've got all sorts of interesting ideas and types of paint as well. They do a lot of colours that they describe as transparent. So for this turquoise colour that I showed you originally, you can not only get the 5 tints of that, but you can also get a transparent turquoise, and that's exactly what it says on the tin. It's basically a paint that you can apply over a previous layer, and it gives it another kind. It sort of softens it. It's not a wash. You shouldn't use it as a wash. It uniformly transforms the colour underneath so that you're looking at it through a kind of brown filter or whatever colour you're using. This one happens to be transparent brown. They have other things like all these paints here come together, and these are specifically have been selected for you to paint flames and fires and so on. And on the website you can actually find a tutorial in how to paint fire effects. so they've taken all kinds of different paints from their range. They've got red 2 there, orange 3, yellow 3, yellow 4, red 3, red 4, yellow 2, orange 4. So there's a mixture of reds and oranges and yellows with the brown, transparent brown. Oh, and I think you get this black colour as well. Yeah, that black comes with it as well. So basically. I'm not a terribly good painter, but I do kind of enjoy messing about and experimenting with paints. And this range seems to give you a little bit of a incentive to experiment, do your own thing. But the ones in particular that to get back to that silk and satin type look that I've tried to apply to a lot of the figures, is they do this fantastic range of metallic paints. And when you first hear the word metallic, you think, yeah, it's going to be golds and bronzes and coppers and silvers and so on, and that's true, it is. So you've got metallic pewter there, pure gold, antique gold, all the kind of, the usual run-of-the-mill things. But they do all these different more primary colours in metal. So metallic ultramarine, metallic lemon, metallic green, metallic magenta, metallic violet. And what I discovered was that you can really, you can use a sort of background paint, such as a blue, for instance. Use a triad, so you've got the depth in the colour, and then over that you can paint patterns of a colour that kind of more or less corresponds. So there's so you could go for a metallic blue or a metallic ultramarine, or do something else that contrasts, like blue and lemon, or blue and white. And it does. I found the result does give you a very kind of realistic silk finish. So I'm going to cut back to the figures now and show you them separately in their groups, and you should be able to see what I mean from that. Right. So up first we've got this group here, which is SZ12, Harold Hardrada's Varangian Guard with double-handed axes. And I put these first just to give you an idea of the effects that I've managed to get using that. I didn't put a sort of satin finish on this one, but he has got satin on his waistband and lower garment there. But I was quite pleased with that. You don't have to be too precise in your patterning, in particular because the straight lines and so on are going to fold around curves in the gown anyway. Excuse me a moment, sorry about that, usual problem with my noisy fridge. Yeah, but this one here, I've done lots of kind of very indeterminate lines and so on. I don't know how well that's going to show. That's got a matte varnish on it, and the metallic kind of shine still shows through. I'm not sure though how much that's going to show up on the camera, because the daylight's reflecting off it a lot. But that was one of the ones I was most pleased with, and this one here, that shows a little bit better, I think, on the camera. But yeah, I thought that was an experiment that paid off. That one here, as I say, I tried to draw some patterns on his sash and the lower tunic that he's wearing. I think you can probably make those out. This one here, not so pleased with that, but hey hey. And oh yeah, and on the bases as well, I've been applying the debris of war flower tufts that I'll probably run over the top with those. But those are the tufts that I purchased at Salute recently. Right, so that's one group. That's the Harold Hardrada's Varangian Guard with double-handed. Next up, this is Harold Hardrada himself, and as I said earlier, not how he looks when you purchase him. I had a lot of problems with that left arm, and ended up having to cover it up with a shield. I almost copied exactly how he's painted on the website, so I didn't use a lot of the metallic colours other than on the rim of the shield. I tried to use them on that, see how that looked, and thought that kind of worked quite well. So that's him. And these guys are Varangian Guard commands. Now, yeah, at this point I should say something about gripping beasts classifications or cataloguing or whatever you'd like to say about how they number all their figures. That, as I say, these figures and a lot of the figures I'm going to show you are much older ranges, obviously sculpted by someone other than the more, other than the person who's done the more recent figures. But you can, when you go to the Gripping Beast website, you can find figures under Saga, but you can also find other Varangian Guard that aren't included in the Saga range as such. These come under thematic Byzantines. So they haven't kind of even included all their range in figures that they specifically produce for the game of Saga. And then again, I think what they're intending is that some of them are intended for use with Harold Hardrada as the Vikings, some are intended as the use for the younger Harold Hardrada with the Byzantines, I don't know. And then you've got the others, like these guys, who don't come under either category, so they've just kept them in their thematic Byzantine section. But there's no reason why you couldn't use these. I'm not terribly keen on them, particularly I think the hornblower and that guy there, I wasn't terribly inspired when I was painting them. This is probably my favourite. He's obviously a captain of some kind. I'm showing you him earlier because this is the one I used the turquoise colour on his cloak, and he didn't come out too badly either. Anyway, so these guys here. Now these to me look like so many other Gripping Beast figures, other than the kind of padded footwear and leg gear they've got on. I mean, these look virtually the same as lots of their other figures, similar kind of poses and chainmail. They remind me a bit of the Flemish mercenaries and so on. And these are described as just straightforward Varangian Guards. Now you can find these on the website, Gripping Beast website, either under the thematic Byzantines or under the Saga section, and they've got 3 separate codes, either SZ09 stroke SV06 or BYZ02. So it shows how long they've been around and how Gripping Beast have kind of tried to incorporate them into their Saga range, which they did with a lot of their figures, to be fair. A lot of their earlier stuff, like their Anglo-Danes and Saxons and Normans and so on. And they're alright, yeah, I'm happy enough with the way they've come out, but there's nothing terribly special about them, and no particular way that you can sort of bling them up a bit, really, because they've got so much chainmail on. But I think those ones clearly, the intention is now that if you're going to play Saga, you buy these to use as your Varangian Guard that go with the older Harold Hardrada. Oh, and that figure, by the way, I'm just painting him up at the minute. I mean, he was one of the first figures I got, and I'm not terribly keen on him. He's oversized, really, because he's meant to look like a giant kind of figure on the battlefield, but he's a bit lumpen and not particularly interesting sculpt, I don't think, so it's taken me a while to get around to painting him. Anyway, so those are the Varangian Guard. These chaps here are Varangian axemen, and similar thing with them, they've got 3 codes. SZ10/SV07, and they're also, you can find them under BYZ04 in the thematic Byzantines. Similar kind of thing. These have all got double-handed axes, which you're allowed to use in the game of Saga with these Varangian Guards. Same kind of thing, there's not much you can do with them because they've got so much chainmail on them. But I have tried to use some of that metallic paint that I was showing you earlier on the tunic underneath that guy's wearing. You can see his sleeves, and on the helmet of that guy there, thought I'd try and be a bit different with the helmet, and on the scabbard of the sword and so on, I did a little bit, just to try and kind of brighten them up a little bit. Yeah, so, you know, fairly routine set of figures, not bad. Okay, on to these chaps you'll only find under the thematic Byzantine section, and these are BYZ03 Varangian Palace Guard. I don't like this blue colour that I've painted the cloaks in at all, but I'm not going to go back and have another go at them. I mean, blue was almost as rare a colour as purple, I've tried to copy the paint scheme that has been used on the website, and I thought it was kind of a good idea in one way to give them blue cloaks, because it did show their kind of Imperial status, as it were, but at the same time it just doesn't look right. And I think I mentioned before, I did, and about the shields are all a little bit crude. This guy's got a shield on his back. Found it very difficult to kind of get the transfers to sort of sit neatly on them. So that's probably my least favourite group out of the whole faction. But they serve a purpose. Okay, and this is the last group. So this is one of the more recent sculpts. I purchased these at Warfare in Reading in 2015, because I didn't go last year, so I've had them quite a while. They come in a blister pack, and didn't take them out and start painting them for a few months, and when I did, you can see immediately that there's a duplication of one of the figures there. They're meant to be 4 separate figures, and unfortunately the one that's missing is actually quite a nice one, so that was a bit of a shame. Yet another kind of bump in the road that I hit. I didn't go so over the top with the metallic colours on the materials that they're wearing. I mean, that one has got something on his sash, little bits in the clothing, but the cloaks themselves I left plain, other than the guys at the back. I put a sort of pattern on the outer kind of border of that one. This one here, I did something. This is my least favourite. I think that's the least effective one that I did. But I was kind of experimenting the whole time. Sometimes the experiment worked, sometimes it didn't. And that's it. That's the lot. So thanks very much for watching, everyone. Just thought I'd talk a little bit about the pitfalls of painting factions altogether. I mean, another thing that I forgot to say was that when you're painting a lot of figures like this, there's 25 altogether, 25 figures. If they've all got fairly kind of uniform colours and colours that they share, then it's probably a good idea to paint about at least a dozen in one go. But when you've got figures like this where every figure's got a different colour scheme or whatever, It's probably a bit much, a bit more. You're biting off a bit more than you can chew if you try to do them all together. And that was another reason why I lost a bit of steam, really, that I didn't seem to be making any progress on any of them. And eventually you just run out of energy to do them. So that would be, if I were to do this again, I would probably paint 6 at a time. And I'd probably be able to keep my enthusiasm going a little bit better. But anyway, that's it. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. See you again on the next video. Bye for now.